The avoidant bait and switch is one of the most painful and confusing things that a person can ever go through in a relationship. This person shows up for you early in dating wonderfully. They seem all in, they're consistent, they're planning dates, they seem to be prioritizing you, and they're even vulnerable with you. But in hindsight, they actually really weren't vulnerable. Yeah, they talked about their life history, but they never really talked about the way they felt about it. They didn't talk about the feelings. It was faux vulnerability. But you thought that they were being vulnerable. They seemed all in. You felt like you met your twin flame, your soulmate, your person, the person that you were supposed to be with. It felt wonderful. But then somewhere around 4 to 8 months, it's like a switch flipped. Now they are showing up entirely different. They seem disinterested. They seem distant. They're getting progressively colder, less affectionate. But when you ask them if everything's fine, they tell you everything's great. They're just busy with work, etc., or something of the sort. But you can feel them slipping through your fingers. And that person that showed up early on never comes back. But your needs are no longer being met, and your anxiety is going through the roof. But you're holding on to that early dating version of them, hoping that that comes back. But it never does. And this is why so many people can stay in long-term relationships and even marriages with avoidance, because they're holding on to that early version that just never reappears. This bait and switch is very common with dismissive avoidance and fearful avoidance that lean heavily dismissive. Early in dating, they really do show up, but that's because their attachment wounds haven't been triggered yet. It's all about the wounds. This is a person that was on the receiving end of consistent childhood emotional neglect. Their emotional needs were not met. But in addition to that, their feelings were dismissed as children too. Shot down, sometimes even reprimanded and punished for having emotions. So what they learned to do is to bottle it up, to suppress it, stuff it, put on a happy face and suppress their emotions. That's how they learn to stay safe. So they learned that being close to anybody in intimacy isn't safe because it wasn't safe for them in childhood. They developed a core wound of shame. Shame is a toxic emotion. It's that I'm unlovable, there's something wrong with me, I'm defective feeling. That's because they personalized that emotional neglect in childhood, feeling like there's something wrong with them. So this is a person that learns that if they get too close to somebody, they're going to have to get vulnerable with that person. And if they lower their walls, that inner shame might get exposed. They might be exposed as being defective and you might reject them. And the better you show up as a partner, the more it triggers them, because the more emotional intimacy naturally builds, which triggers that shame. I'm defective. They're going to figure out I'm defective. I'm going to get rejected. This person is better than I deserve. I better create distance now. But a lot of this comes at the subconscious level, and they don't even realize why they do this around 4, 6, 8 months. It's a maladaptive self-defense mechanism, meaning it's almost automatic in their brains to create emotional distance to keep themselves safe, because emotional distance between themselves and their partner helps prevent them from having their inner wound of shame and defectiveness exposed. Because if you're at an emotional distance, you can't figure out that they are defective. It's not that they're actually defective, but they believe themselves to be. Plus, they also associate emotional closeness with losing their independence, getting smothered. That's because they usually had a parent that was very controlling, but not in a nurturing way. So, 4 to 8 months, guess what? The dopamine levels are also coming down. That early version of them was dopamine fueled. Dopamine is the reward hormone. It makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're on cloud 9. It makes you feel infatuated. It gives you those butterflies. Now they are riding that dopamine high with you early on. That's why the early part of a relationship with an avoidant is called the shared fantasy. Because it is a fantasy. It's a romance novel. It's a fairy tale. It's not a real relationship yet because there's no real emotional intimacy. You haven't known each other long enough. There's no real things like conflict or heavy expectations because, again, it's still too early, which is why they're able to show up. Those wounds of intimacy and vulnerability, expectations, things like that have not been triggered yet. But the brain cannot maintain that elevated level of dopamine forever. It simply can't. It's science. So between 4 to 8 months, dopamine levels in the brain come down. Now, for a healthier person that is emotionally available, oxytocin is taking over. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. And in addition to bonding, it also helps keep those romantic feelings alive. But keep in mind, love is also a choice, a daily choice of choosing somebody and prioritizing them and empathizing. But it helps keep those romantic feelings alive. But avoidance, especially dismissive avoidance, due to that emotional neglect in childhood, they really were not exposed to oxytocin the way that a healthier person was. So while you're bonding to them at an oxytocin level, they are not bonding to you. The oxytocin is in their bloodstream, but it doesn't interact with the brain in the same way that it does with a healthier person. Dopamine comes down, there's no oxytocin there. All that's left is their insecurities. That's it. Their insecurities. Their fears of losing their independence, their fears of being rejected, their fears of being exposed as being defective. So now they start to withdraw, which is called deactivation, and flaw find. Looking for little flaws in you to justify their fears so they don't have to self-reflect, take accountability, and face their inner shame. It could be very petty things, and it usually is. Ooh, I don't like the way this person sips their coffee. I don't like the way they eat. I don't like the way they mow their grass. I don't like the way that they don't use their turn signals when they drive. Very small, nitpicky things, but in the mind of the avoidant, it's huge, it's enormous. It means that you're incompatible. See, if they can find something small but make it significant to prove incompatibility, well, that means they're not accountable for ending the relationship. It's not their fault. You're just not accountable. As a matter of fact, it's your fault. Because as long as it's not their fault, they don't have to self-reflect, which means they don't have to look within, because that's very painful. They like to avoid that. And they don't have to take accountability. In their mind, accountability saying, hey, this is my fault, or I do this wrong, or this is a shortcoming of mine, is the emotional equivalent of confirming their own defectiveness. I did this wrong because I'm defective. Too painful. So as long as it's somebody else's fault or something else's fault, they don't have to self-reflect. They don't have to take that accountability. So they lack self-awareness as to why they're doing this, because they don't self-reflect and they don't look within. It's always somebody else's fault. So they repeat the pattern over and over and over and over again. But now there are cultural expectations, family expectations. So even though they deactivate and withdraw emotionally, some of them feel that pressure to get married, have children, etc. So they don't actually dump or discard their partner. They continue in the relationship even through marriage. But what they do is they keep a very distant relationship with no emotional intimacy, and with each milestone of the relationship, like engagement, marriage, they withdraw further emotionally to create more emotional distance to keep themselves safe. The person on the other end finds the relationship more painful and more anxiety producing, because this person that showed up early on is now distancing, even though the relationship is advancing, and it never gets any better unless they take accountability and really commit towards changing, healing, and growing and becoming secure, forming new pathways in the brain to become more emotionally available and to be able to bond and do all that kind of stuff. They can do it, but they have to want it. But you can't make them. So if 4 to 8 months are passing by and this person suddenly is withdrawing and suppressing their feelings and they're feeling like they're checking out of the relationship, pay attention, because if you stick around for this, it only gets worse. It only gets worse. But it's hard to walk away because you're bonded to this person. But sticking around and ignoring your boundaries, not holding any boundaries here, and not making sure that your partner's showing up for you and allowing it and staying it, is a recipe to have a relationship that is unfulfilling with tons of emotional distance, where your needs aren't getting met and you ultimately self-abandon and blame yourself and become more anxious. Don't do it. Hold your boundaries. Hold your boundaries. If they are not showing up for you, you don't have to stick around for it. Yes, it's painful to end the relationship, but it's a lot less painful to end it between 4 to 8 months than it is years in.